Six eyes of learning, and I do stress learning. This is about development. This is about learning. This isn't about training. It is about good training. It's about training that results in long-term change of behavior that impacts on performance, but there's not enough of that going on. Here, my emphasis really is on where we learn most things, where we learn the genuinely impactful real stuff, the things that happen in our real lives and in our workplaces. So my emphasis, not to the exclusion of good training that results in performance improvements because it's real and it relates to people's genuine needs. My emphasis here is going to be on informal learning, and particularly learning which is self-directed. Just run through these quickly. I won't take too long on this. The first I is individual. And by this I mean that all development and all learning is individually oriented, or it should be. We are all different. We have different needs, and individuals should be thought about, focused upon, and worked with when it comes to learning. That rarely happens. You'll get herded onto chairs and told the same things. You're telling very different people with very different needs, going back to very different workplaces. If you're working in a conventional group-based way, you're telling these people the same thing, and they're going back, and what's happening afterwards? Very little. So with individually based learning, particularly if it's coaching based or if you're just encouraging people to manage their own, it respects the individual. It says you are different to other people. Your needs and your context is different. We understand and respect you as an individual. So that's the first. Hey, number two, and these aren't in any particular priority or sequential order. They all impact on each other, by the way. They're not in isolation. So incremental, by that I mean the learning that works best is not giant leaps which are unsustainable, but small, very often unexciting, but embedded learning. So incremental means being satisfied with and seeing value in learning that happens in small steps, not huge leaps. So individual, incremental, we move on to intentional. This is my new one. I had 5 I's until I introduced intentional. I don't intend to make it a 7-part model. So by intentional, I mean too much learning happens accidentally, haphazardly. And by the way, that can be the best sort of learning. We can enhance the value of any form of learning if we make it intentional. If there's a plan, plans change, circumstances change, things take people by surprise, but that doesn't mean that there shouldn't be a plan, even if it's broad. So the more intentional, the more conscious and deliberate learning becomes, the more likely it's going to result in something positive. So intentional, I think that's very important. The 4I is immersive. If we're going to learn something thoroughly, if we're going to learn something properly in a way that it becomes embedded, that it becomes something that we use to change our behavior positively, then we need to immerse ourselves in that. It doesn't need to be a 3-hour immersion, an 8-hour immersion. It could be a 3 or an 8-minute immersion. But whatever we're learning will work best and the effort we put into it will be more efficient if we do so to the exclusion of all other distractions. If we say, in order to learn this properly, I've got to focus on it and nothing else for the time it takes. And that time might not be longer than, say, 20 minutes. If it's 15 minutes, you might have wasted those 15 minutes because you didn't give it the 5 more it took to truly get grips with whatever it is. I think over the 43 years that I've been working in learning and development, I've seen people give up too soon, become distracted, look for a distraction to take them away from the frustration sometimes that things don't happen immediately. Very little does that's got any value. Learning's the same. So we need to immerse ourselves to really truly focus on what it is we're trying to learn and nothing else. Intrinsic. Sorry. So intrinsic means that learning is all around us. We don't have to look for it. We don't have to contrive it. We can give it more structure. We can give it more clarity. It's there. And I think too often we think, oh, we've got to create some great content. We don't. The content's all around us. It's called real work and real life. So understanding that, seeing value in it, and using the reality of any individual's context to say, what's happening for you? What's going to be the learning experiences we can prepare you for in the next whatever day, month, year? We don't have to look hard. Real work, real life is a constant stream of development opportunities. I sometimes say it's like standing under a waterfall with a colander. You only catch the drips. We don't have to look too hard. And lastly, but I could have done these in any order, iterative. And this is a good word. What it means is learning isn't linear. Learning is iterative. You go forward a bit, you go backwards. You might go backwards again before you go forward. It's frustrating, it's confusing, it can sometimes be disappointing. It can eat into our motivation. Ultimately, if we stick at it immersively, then we can make that iterative process go forward quite a bit further than where we started. But don't expect it all to be forward, forward, forward. We've got to believe that the most valuable learning, the most difficult very often learning, is an iterative process. It's also an excuse for saying, well, I didn't get it right that time, or I'm only making the progress I can. Sometimes we can make that iterative process work more efficiently. I think it's important to realize that it's never a straight line. We don't get from A to B to C to D. We might go from A to B to C, then go back to A, B, back to A again before we reach D. That's the nature of learning. That's real learning. So putting all these together, it's entirely possible to say, look, all 6 of these are working together at the same time. We're working with an individual with intentional learning and creating more intentional learning, recognizing that it could be incremental, knowing it should be immersive and giving that the time, recognizing that we don't have to feed too much into the process because intrinsically the work that this person's engaged in will provide the opportunity, and that will be an iterative, sometimes frustrating process. This works for me. I hope there's something in here that you find of value. Always keen to hear from people if I can help further.